It's time to understand the twice turned 10% rule. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today we're going to take this once turned bowl and we are going to twice turn it. Yeah, we're going to turn it a second time, and in the process I'm going to thoroughly explain to you the 10% rule that we use when we twice turn bowls. It's really important that you follow this rule, because if you don't, you could end up with not enough material to make a nice final bowl. Now, why do we use a twice turn process anyway? Well, this bowl was turned once and was roughed out. This was done about 2 years ago, and it's allowed this bowl to dry. Now, when this first came off the lathe, it was perfectly round. It was wet. This is oak. It was wet at the time, but it was perfectly round the day that it came off the lathe. As it's dried over time, you can see how much it's distorted. The pith area has moved out. It looks like it's moved outward and upward, but in reality what's happened is the sides have contracted and moved inward and down. So if you see this rise in the center pith area, the sides have actually pulled inward as this is dried. So it's deformed. Now, why would we want to do this, and why would we want to let a bowl do this? Well, all wood is wet and all wood contains moisture all the time. Even the driest piece of furniture you have in your home right now has moisture in it to some degree. And the idea is to get as much of that moisture out as possible and let the bowl actually do its warping and shaping while it's once turned. Now we're going to put this back on a lathe and turn it a second time. When we do that, because this wood is already dried, it is not going to warp any farther, and it should become a nice, perfectly round bowl that will stay round into the future. So we let it do its expanding and warping and contracting after the first roughing, and then we do a second turn. And that's why we do twice turn bowls. Now, one of the things that's really important when we do that first turning is we leave the walls about 10% of the thickness of the diameter. So you take the overall diameter, this is about 12 inches wide, which means that these walls are about 1.25 inches wide, and this is an even wall thickness. You really want the walls to be evenly thick. We don't want it to be relatively thin here and then really thick in the bottom, or vice versa. That evenness throughout the bowl is going to allow the moisture to escape. So the 10% rule is really important, and I'm going to show you why as we turn. So I'm going to get this mounted to the lathe and we're going to get started with this turning.
All right, I'm going to use this large face plate that has this special insetted center area. The purpose of this center area is to receive those raised pith areas right there. Because they jet out, if I had a flat jam chuck here, that would not work so well. So that little recessed area, or that cutout area, is designed to hold that shape, and this is going to give the bowl a really good seat on this jam chuck. Now you can see how the tenon and the shoulder are also distorted, so I'm going to go ahead and true those up first of all. It's a really great idea to use that quill point from your tailstock every time you turn, so that you have that mark there. If you notice, I actually just lined up that mark and was pretty much able to match up the center of the bowl pretty quickly. Because this bowl has distorted so much, it's not going to appear as if it's mounted true, but it's very close to being true if you've got that center point matched up. So I'm going to clean up the face of the tenon, and I'm using my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge here. Then I'm going to go ahead and mark the size for the chuck that I'm going to be using right now. The other thing you want to keep in mind when you're turning a twice turn bowl is you want to make everything a little bit bigger so that you have wiggle room. In this case, I made the tenon just a little bit larger than what I needed initially, and that gives me the flexibility now to true this back up to the actual size that I need for the final turning. We're just taking our time here and making really nice, simple push cuts. Now you're going to get a little vibration from the bowl blank because you have an uneven surface there. It almost works like a cam where you have a high and a low spot. So it's going to want to throw the gouge around just a bit. So you need to take your time, let the cutting edge engage, and then work forward. Now I'm going to put a relatively small foot on this bowl. Shape that tenon just a little bit more. And then I need to work this area that's been reduced, but it hasn't been shaped yet, for the base of the bowl. The other thing to keep in mind is when we use the 10% rule for twice turning, there's plenty of material here to work with. So I still have plenty of room to shape the bottom of this bowl pretty significantly. If you see here, I'm using a pole cut and I'm coming into the bottom of this bowl and shaping it. Now the shoulder and the tenon that are there will become the foot of the bowl. So I'm using the pole cut out to a certain point because it's impossible to get the gouge in there otherwise. And then I'm turning around and using a push cut, as you see here. And again, we have this high and low spot from the distortion. So you want to take your time and you really want to anchor the tool down into the tool rest and use your body weight, shifting your body weight to make that cut. Now I've got a video all about how to move your body when you're cutting. You can see the low spots here still. We have low spots and high spots still, so it's not leveled out yet. So this is going to bounce the tool around, and it's really important that you understand how to make a really good, smooth, body weight controlled pass. And what I mean by that is, don't use your hands. Do not use your hands and your arms to make these cuts. What you want to do is you want to put the tool in its location, lock it down, put weight down into the tool rest, and then you're just gently shifting your body weight. Your feet don't move, your hands don't move. You're basically shifting your body weight and making this cut. That way you're going to have a nice, smooth, even pass that's not going to be all lumpy and bumpy. So I need to take a little more material out, so I'm using a pole cut here. And I've got a little bit of bark enclosure in this blank, which is interesting. I'm hoping it doesn't cause any issues with the foot of the bowl. So I've used the pole cut to get out to this location. Now I got to take down this high spot. So I switched over to a push cut. And then I'll work around this outer curve of the exterior of the bowl. Take your time, make sure you have a bevel riding supported cut here. Now this is a very hard wood. This is dried oak, or relatively dry. Still have some low spots in here. All right, so we need to take off more material still and get down to that low spot. You can see the difference there now. Now that we start smoothing out the sides, you can see how dramatic that distortion is on the pith area. The pith area is the center of the log that was cut. And everything seems to radiate from that pith area outward as far as the contraction and the movement of the wood. So because there was still a low spot in there, I'm just going to make another pass with the push cut, and this should bring us down to an even surface all the way around. You're going to feel it too. When you get a clicking or a bouncing sound, that's because you're not cutting an even surface. When you get down to an even surface, the tool is engaged the entire time. So you're going to have a relatively smooth cut, even if it's a harder wood like this. Okay, so now I'm going to go up to my 5/8 inch 55 degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, and I'm going to use the shear scrape. The shear scrape is a refining cut. This cut is designed to finish off the surface and smooth it out. So this will take out any bumps or any tool marks very quickly, but it won't remove a ton of material. It's just going to leave these nice little shavings that's going to really finish out the surface very nicely and leave very little sanding necessary. I've got a video all about the shear scrape you might want to check out after this video. Okay, I'm looking at that tenon, and I think I need to bring the angle in a little bit. I kind of eyeball this. My chuck, I think I've been told, I haven't measured it, but it has about an 11-degree angle on the jaws, and that didn't seem like it was initially was quite enough, so I just needed to true that up just a little bit. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and reverse this now. I'm going to get this mounted in the chuck. To remember, when you're doing a tenon, it should not be so thick or deep that it bottoms out in the chuck. The only thing that engages the chuck is the size of the tenon and the base of the shoulder. That's it. It does not bottom out in the chuck. That's very important. And I have a video all about that as well. So if you've got more questions, check out that video. Okay, here you can see, now that we've trued up the exterior, you can see, if you look at the top of this video, you can see the bowl turning pretty smoothly there, but the interior and that rim are really out of whack. You can see we can take our time, just going to remove a little bit of material. What you don't want to do is you don't want to get aggressive here and try to make a big bite and try to take that all at once, because you're going to get a nasty catch. Instead, we're going to make just small passes. Again, you can see when you start to level out, you're going to engage more material. But at first, we're just hitting those high spots. So it's like a clicking sound, like click, 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 click. That's how you know you're not really engaging the entire surface. Now we're starting to get more and more continuous cut. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start shaping the outside of this rim and take off some of that excess material. Now, I didn't work all the way down to the side because of the rubber matting on that faceplate or that jam chuck that I was using. So here you can see what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a slightly closed rim, meaning the outer rim is just a little bit narrower than the widest point of the bowl. I'm doing a push cut, and then I'm going to use a scraping cut here to clean this up a bit. Kind of creating a point there, which I don't want that. There's kind of a high spot there from the lower part of the exterior and the rim. It could be interesting, but I'd rather have that smooth and curved. So I'm going to get the rim edge where I want it, and then I'm going to blend those surfaces in. Now I'm dropping the handle of the bowl gouge here just a little bit. And this is creating more of a shear scrape versus a scraping cut. What happens when you drop that handle is you get a little bit lighter cut, and you're more like shaving. Okay, so now you can see the interior of the bowl is still in its deformed state. And you can see that there's a thin area and a thick area. I'm going to put a pencil mark here so you can see that a little bit better. It's actually not touching a couple of spots. Let me darken this up a little bit for you. So you can see a little bit, you can see how right there it's thicker, and then it gets really thin there, and then it gets thicker again. That's the distortion that occurred after the drying of the first turning. So that's what we're going to turn away here. And quite honestly, this bowl did not distort dramatically or as much as it could. I've seen other tree species that have done incredible things. I had a piece of sycamore that essentially turned itself into a football. And when I say football, I'm thinking American football, which is like an elongated oval with points on it. Not a round ball, but an American football. I know we have a lot of viewers that aren't in America, and a football is basically what we call a soccer ball. But anyway, I've seen certain tree species that will distort dramatically, almost to the point where the 10% rule is not enough. You almost need more material. So hopefully you guys understand what we're doing is by the time we take the high spot off of the exterior, we've removed a large chunk of that 10% of the bowl or that rim. And then when we come back to the interior and we've trued that back up, we've also potentially taken off another large chunk of that 10%. So essentially, the 10% rule allows there to be enough material that we can actually design and create the bowl that we want. In this case, you see me make this slightly closed rim. Now I'm back to my regular turning techniques. I'm basically establishing the wall thickness that I want for this bowl, and then I'm going to continue that wall thickness all the way down into the base of this bowl. You want to work and make your cuts and passes at a pace that works well for the wood that you're working. This is a relatively hard oak, and I'm not going to get aggressive with this. If I start taking bigger bites, it's going to slow the lathe down or create a catch. If I try to go quicker, I'm just going to have a rougher surface. So I'm going to take my time. Before I go any farther, though, I'm going to do all my finishing touches on this rim because I don't want to come back up to that rim. It's going to start vibrating as I go down farther into the bowl, and with those thin walls, any vibration could cause damage at that wall if I return up there. So you want to finish up your rim detail right away and then work down into the bowl. I'm noticing here that I have to push a little bit harder, and that means it's time to sharpen. So I'm going to finish up a few of these passes, and then I'm going to go sharpen this tool. That's the big thing, is to keep in mind when you're done sharpening your tool how easy it cuts. Before I go over there, I'm going to check this wall thickness. I've got pretty much an even wall thickness going through there, and I'm just going to make a quick little pass here. But you want to pay attention to how well your gouge is turning, or cutting rather. And if you see that it's starting to not be as smooth as before, you're going to want to go back to the sharpening station. I like to remove a little bit of this waste material. It's kind of, I know that I need to sharpen right now, but I'm going to remove some of this waste material with this little bit duller edge. And I'm going to bring back a fresher cutting edge to the lower surface, which will be the final part of the bowl. So a lot of times I will do this where I'm just kind of removing material with a not so ideal cutting edge, and then I'll go clean up that cutting edge. Okay, so once I'm over at the sharpening station, it's just a matter of quickly mounting this to the jig, getting the depth set up, and cleaning up those cutting edges. We're essentially just cleaning up the bevel edge. And once you have your whole system set up, it makes everything so much easier and quicker to get this done. I've got a course all about tool sharpening, and the course also deals with shaping. So if you're interested in using a 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge like me, you don't have to buy anything special. You can get a regular bowl gouge, and I'll show you in this course how to shape it like the profile that I use. I can see immediately with this cleaned up cutting edge that it's cutting much better here. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to check the wall thickness. You want this area down towards the bottom there to be just a little bit thicker. Remember, I'm not going to return and remove any major material up on the top wall. You want to basically establish that wall thickness and be done with it. I'm going to rub here and pick up a really light cut. And as I go deeper, I'm going to remove just a little bit more material. So I'm going to be sneaking up on that wall thickness and matching it all the way down this bowl. You want to stop frequently and check. It's going to give you a lot of peace of mind. Now see, I'm way up here, but I'm not removing much material. I'm just making a very, very light cut. And if you look at the depth of the cut, it gradually increases as I go deeper. And that's what I mean by sneaking up on that wall thickness. All right, so I'm going to start removing the material in the center here. We no longer need any of that. And I'm feeling a little vibration. That was my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. And I really want to get the tool rest just to the right height. Remember, every tool is a little bit different. So this is my 5/8 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. It's going to be a little bit more stable. I probably could switch over to my J tool rest, which reaches down in there a little bit deeper, but this tool rest is going to do the trick, I think. Just take your time and let the tool tell you what pace it wants. And you can tell that this is not cutting as fast as I would with a lighter, softer, or more moisture containing wood. This is a slow pass. This is a very hard wood. And I get a lot of questions about that too. People ask like, well, what do you do with an old piece of wood that's super hard? Well, you take your time. You kind of have to listen to it, and you have to sharpen your tools frequently. You need to have a sharp bowl gouge and just take your time and work that surface based on what the wood is telling you. I've got a little bit of a high spot in the bottom of this. So I'm going to pick that up. I'm going to rub the bevel gently and just pick up that cut. Take my time. And I'm going to close the flute when I get to the center here, meaning I'm going to turn it close to the 3 o'clock position and just lightly take that center out. All right, now I've got this little bit of a bark enclosure here. I just want to remove any of this loose material. I don't want there to be anything that's going to fall out later. So I'm just going to take my time and remove a bunch of this loose material using a dental pick. I'll put a link to that and everything else that I use in this video in the description below. And there's a slight tension crack in the pith area on this one side. I don't think it's going to be a major issue, but I'm going to go ahead and apply some glue to that. And the way that works is you basically press that glue down into it, and then use some fine sandpaper. This is like 150 grit, and sand that into it. And what you're going to do is it's going to cauterize that, and it pushes it down into it. And that's a really easy, quick way to deal with minor cracks like that. So I'm going to go ahead and take my time and sand this up. I'm going to go through all the grits. I'm starting at 120. I'm going to go to 180, 240, and 320. I've got a video all about sanding if you want to learn more about how to sand a bowl properly. Just remember, turn the lathe off when you're sanding that center area. All right, that's looking pretty cool actually. I'm going to go ahead and reverse mount this again. I'm going to use that same jam chuck or face plate. I call it a face plate. There's a face plate that's mounted to the base of this. It's very simple. You can make this with plywood. And I used the rubber mat material, like floor mat material. That center area being gone is really not making that big of a difference here. But see, right now I can match up that center point that was made by the tailstock before, and it's super beneficial to have that. Okay, so I'm going to work the shoulder off. The shoulder and the tenon will become the foot of this bowl. You're going to want to remember to tighten that tailstock up as you do this. Make sure it's good and snug. Because when we get down to the very end where there's a little nub on there, you don't want to tighten it then, because it'll be very easy to crush the wood fibers and lose your center on this. So right now is when you want to take a couple seconds right there and reaching over and tightening up that tailstock. Because the more material that gets removed around it, it's easier for any pressure or added pressure from the tailstock to kind of fold over that little piece of wood there, and then you're not going to be able to mount it back on center very easily. So I'm going to determine the depth or the height of that foot, and I'm just very lightly going to make scraping and shear scraping passes here to match that surface to the other part of the bowl. Now, the difference between a shear scrape and a scrape, the scrape and cut is more horizontal and it's more aggressive and it's ripping material out. A shear scrape, we're dropping that handle to almost a 45-degree angle and it basically becomes a shaving cut. Now I'm going to use my spindle detail gouge in here and really clean up the side of this foot, and I'm going to apply a little angle to it. This spindle detail gouge allows me to get into this angled corner very cleanly. I'm just kind of doing a gentle scraping cut with it as well. Now I'm going to the shear scrape to merge the two areas which I just cut to the finished sanded area. Then I'll just take a few minutes and sand that new area so it blends in with the rest of the exterior of the bowl. It appears as if that bark enclosure is not going to cause a problem for the foot, thankfully. It's actually really cool added character for the bowl. I really love finding those things inside a bowl. We don't get them all the time. It's nice to have something like that that makes each bowl unique. Some people don't like that. Some people want the wood to be perfect, and that's fine too. I get that, but it's nice to have a little character every once in a while. This is the point where we don't want to tighten the tailstock anymore because it's going to crush that small area. Now this is a backwards scraping cut. You want to be very careful with this, and you do not want to catch here because it could cause problems. You just take your time, go very, very slow. And I've got a very open pass here to make sure that you're only engaging the area that you intend to engage. And what I'm doing is I want to smooth that inside portion of the foot out so that it's curved and matches the exterior of the bowl. I'm going to scrape that inside foot just a little bit. And I'm going to switch over to my spindle detail gouge. This allows me to get down in there a little bit easier than the 1/2-inch bowl gouge. So I'm going to reduce that nub just a little bit more. Now, if you're not comfortable doing this, you can stop right here and sand that nub down. It's not a problem. You can cut it off if you want with a small knife and then sand that area smooth. I like to apply a forward pressure here and then turn the lathe off and just let the tool cut those last fibers. There we go. And you can pull that out of the way and you've got a little nub there. So I'll sand that foot and we're going to apply finish now. I'm using tried and true original. This is Danish oil with beeswax. Now, it's important to apply just enough to see it on the surface. You do not need a thick amount of this finish. If you see finish on the surface, you have enough. And the way I do this is I'll basically just go around and make sure that it's all has just a thin amount on there. And then I will let that sit. And then an hour later, I'll rub off any excess. It's really important not to leave any excess on here because it will get gummy and it won't cure properly. So we do not want to leave any excess finish on the bowl. Look at this wood grain though. Absolutely gorgeous. And I love that bark enclosure. This turns out to be a beautiful piece. Just take your time, make sure that all the surface is coated. And then I'll reapply. I'm basically just dipping this. It's a small piece of cut off t-shirt that I use as an applicator. You don't want to use anything with paper fibers in it. You don't want to use a paper towel or anything like that because those paper fibers will break away and can get into your final finish. And then I'll go ahead and just work all the way around this rim and make sure everything has got a nice even coat of finish on it. And there's the final piece. Look at that wood grain, absolutely gorgeous. Now this is an oak and it is It's absolutely gorgeous. I love the curve, that slightly closed rim. It's just a beautiful, beautiful, clean, simple bowl that is going to stay nice and true because it's twice turned. Absolutely gorgeous. Love making these bowls.
Here's the final piece, and I think it turned out great, but most importantly, it's perfectly round, which of course is going to be when it comes off the lathe, but because the moisture has been mostly removed from this piece, it's not going to change anymore. So it's going to keep this beautiful round shape pretty much forever. Or it really won't be noticeable by us at all if there is any contraction in those sides any farther. It's not going to move any noticeable amount. So hopefully this illustrates the importance of the 10% rule. If we didn't leave that 10% gap in there, we might not have enough space to actually turn a bowl. Now this bowl actually didn't change that much in shape. You could see how the sidewalls were thicker and thinner after I'd turned the outside and started working on the inside, but it wasn't really dramatic. I've seen ones that have expanded a lot and there was almost not enough room to complete a bowl. Once you true up that outside, those wide spots on the outside, they could be really close to the inside of what's in the interior. So you want to make sure you leave that 10% of wall thickness. Now that's 10% of the diameter, remember. So whatever the diameter is of the piece that you're turning initially, take 10% of that and make the walls that thick. That way you should have enough material to true up the exterior and then true up the interior and have enough wiggle room to play with the design. In this case, we did a slightly closed rim and a nice rounded top here. And there was more than enough room for me to work and make different shapes. I could have done other things with here. I could have put a beaded edge on this, could have done a variety of different things. So it gives you options, but most importantly, it gives you the ability to have material to turn your final bowl when you do your twice turning. So now you know exactly the reason for doing the 10% wall thickness when you're doing a twice turn bowl. All right guys, I hope you liked this video. If you did, do me a huge favor and click that like button. Thank you. Be sure you're subscribing if you're not already subscribing, and check out my website, turnawoodbowl.com. Over there, I've got tons of information about turning wood bowls. And I have courses, online courses, that you can start right now and quickly grow your wood bowl turning skills. So check it out, turnawoodbowl.com. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. And as always, until next time, happy turning.